let's go back. Way, way back. Hey everyone, welcome back to Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and as always guys, I am Andrew, and today I have got a video about my old top 10, but before we get into that video, make sure you are liking and subscribing, hitting that bell notification so you can get regular updates for when I put out new content. And this is kind of an idea that I got from my buddy Baron from Your Brain on Books, which I'll have his video linked in the description box down below. But basically, you know, as readers, we're kind of always evolving, always changing, always reaching for another series, always exploring more worlds, more characters, and so over time, your reading taste will change as you grow and, you know, become somebody else somebody different than you were yesterday, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so kind of what I'm doing here is my favorite kind of top 10 series that I can remember off the top of my head from the ages of like 10 to 18. And I'm 32 now, so I'm a much different person than I was back then. Trust me on this. So I've got 10 books / series here, and I'll kind of talk about them and stuff like that, and I'll throw pictures of the first books right here and stuff like that. But kind of starting it off, let's kind of start with the one that started it all, which, surprising nobody, I've only got 3 books, at least 3 physical books out of these 10 anymore. Like, my collection has changed that much. But we're going to start with The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I remember very clearly at like 10 or 11 for a Christmas present, I got a mass market paperback of, I'll put it right there, this god-awful cover of The Hobbit. And I remember I read that sucker so many times that I had like duct tape on the spine because I didn't know how to take care of a book. But yeah, it was honestly magical going on adventures with, you know, Gandalf and Bilbo and just Thorin, and I really enjoyed diving into Middle Earth like that. And it was kind of what started me on my whole fantasy journey. Now, I don't know which came first, The Hobbit or Dragonlance, but, you know, we'll talk about that in a minute. So definitely I have to mention at the number 1 spot, The Hobbit, because I read that book to pieces. I'm due for a reread. And yeah, I will be here hopefully sometime this year. I would at least like to get The Hobbit reread, if not the whole of The Lord of the Rings. And then, surprising nobody, this one is still my number 1 book of all time. I don't know how much of that is nostalgia. It is going to be The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is the one that I think is still in my top 10. Everything else I think has shifted, and I'll probably have to do an updated top 10 here soon because my reading pace is ridiculous, and I have just been discovering all sorts of new favorites here recently. But The Eye of the World is honestly just, it's magical to me. It's kind of like another take on that Lord of the Rings style fantasy, getting a party together, going on a quest, on a journey, on an adventure, you know, good versus evil, things of that nature. I absolutely love this book, and I will probably love this book until the day I die. And then I've mentioned on the channel many times before that as a kid, I loved City of Golden Shadow, or as I call it, Otherland. And it's actually the Otherland series. It's been renamed, but this is an original first edition hardcover with the original name on it. So I always call this Otherland. And I really liked it. I just finished the series like last month, and I started this when I was like 12 or 13. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is, but I just love the kind of techno thriller kind of with fantasy elements. And, you know, this kind of starts out in, like, you know, South Africa, or maybe it's just Africa. I loved, like, learning about Bushmen and stuff like that. It was just very non-traditional. Something unique that, you know, I felt I was reading that not a lot of people were. Now, obviously, it's Ted Williams. A lot of people read Ted Williams. It was just, for me as a young kid, I thought that this was something incredibly special. And so, yes, at the number 3 slot, because it takes the number 3 slot because it's the last physical copy that I have. Alright, now, I don't know if some of these came before the age of 10, but, like, they stick out very prominently in my memory. It may have been that I was reading this around the same time as The Hobbit. I want to talk about the Merlin series by T.A. Barron. And I didn't read the entire series. I only remember reading the first 5. But man, this series was so cool. It followed like a young Merlin as like he is just, and this is of course like not traditional Arthurian legend Merlin, but it's still Merlin. I just remember like adventures of him kind of like discovering his magic, climbing towers, adventuring through like mirrors and stuff to enter like different fantasy lands. It was really interesting as a young kid, and it was definitely a gateway into fantasy and a lifelong love for Merlin. I really need to kind of dive deeper into Arthurian legend stuff because it's something that I've kind of neglected throughout my reading life, because I've always been scared to kind of dive into like Le Morte d'Arthur or, you know, the Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell and things of that nature. The Once and Future King by T.H. White, I think is who writes that one. Like, I want to read these things because I read Young Merlin by T.A. Barron. I then don't talk about it often on the channel, but one of my very first sci-fi, my uncle used to live with us. Like, he was going through a hard time when, you know, I was a young kid, and so he had come to live with us. And he had been in the Navy and things of that nature, and so I believe at the time it was recommended reading in the military to read Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. And I remember one day I came down and I saw he was reading it, and he was just like, oh yeah, this is one of my favorite books. It's got like this whole battle school thing. And so like when he moved out, he gifted me a copy as kind of like a goodbye gift. And I read Ender's Game probably 10 times. Like I had a lot of the story elements memorized to the point where like I would, like, in high school, just, like, they had this, like, kind of testing to make sure we were reading, and I would just do, like, Ender's Game, a whole bunch, and then, like, you know, I'd just get a whole bunch of free points because I had the book memorized, and, like, they were like, oh, I've just got it memorized, like, you know, it is what it was. But I ended up reading all the way through, I think, Xenocide, and then on the Ender Shadow series, or the Shadows of Ender, I don't remember. I only read Ender's Shadow, which I really enjoyed, which is Bean's storyline. But in that whole universe in that series, I kind of enjoyed those books. Ender's Game, of course, being my favorite because Speaker for the Dead and Xenocide got weird. And then, like, the series got even weirder. It's still ongoing, but it's not something I'm going to ever pick back up. A, because I've heard that it kind of just falls flat. Like, the magic of the series is kind of gone. I remember, like, later books followed, like, clones of the original cast, and I was just like, yeah, okay, whatever. So, yeah, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, or the Ender Wiggins Saga, I guess is what it was called. And then, of course, coming up next, and the Xanth books by Piers Anthony. And there's a whole bunch of Xanth books. They're very silly, they're very tongue-in-cheek, they're kind of punny. If you've seen anything about a Xanth book, the first one's A Spell for Chameleon. I think I read like the first 12. Maybe a little further than that. I don't quite remember where that kind of where I drew that line of this is getting silly. It's, you know, there's just gags about women's underwear, and like if you see a woman's underwear, like a man will kind of like blank out. There was a book called The Color of Her Panties. The Isle of View, Castle Rugana, Ogre are just the few. Centaur Isle are just the few that I remember reading and kind of chuckling at as like this, you know, preteen. You know, as a young boy, I thought that this was funny. The map is like the shape of Florida. Very just kind of campy fantasy. So I remember reading those. I remember loving them. I remember going to the library to get them and my mom rolling her eyes at me. But yeah, I read the Xanth books. I then read Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman's Dragonlance books. I read a lot of Dragonlance. And sadly, this is no longer a top 10 for me because last year we did a reread of the initial trilogy and it did not hold up. The nostalgia factor was what was keeping that a favorite in my mind, and it's just to my current taste of who I am now, it couldn't meet what was in my mind. And so sad, that made me sad. I still look back on the series with fondness, because I remember I read the first 3 trilogies, and then I read like a prequel series. I read some of the standalones. Soul Forge, where we kind of discover the origins of Raceland and stuff like that, I really enjoyed. I read some of the ones where like we kind of go off and talk with the gnomes, or just Wanderlust. I remember very clearly with Tasselhoff Burrfoot, and so it's a series that will always hold a special place in my heart. But it no longer holds a place in my top 10. So yeah, that sucks. But and then there's of course the Star Wars series. And here, I mean, I read Young Jedi Knights, I read The New Jedi Order, I read the Thrawn trilogy, the original Thrawn trilogy, which starts with Heir to the Empire, where we meet Grand Admiral Thrawn. This was kind of, to me, the real continuation of Star Wars, because I don't like the new movies. We're not here to talk about the new movies, but I don't like them. I am going to get ready to watch Kenobi here soon, but, you know, I digress. We're here to talk books. Heir to the Empire was awesome. There was just a bunch of great ideas. We get introduced to Mara Jade as a character. We kind of start learning about, you know, how Han and Leia's relationship kind of progressed after the movies, and to see where that went. And it was just absolutely awesome. One of the best space operas ever. And yeah, I will always love Star Wars. It doesn't hold as high of an esteem as it used to in my heart, but I still do love me some Star Wars. And then the one non-fantasy series that I absolutely devoured as a kid would be the DIRK PITT novels by Clive CUSSLER. And I think I read the first like 20 DIRK PITT novels. I remember Sahara was one of my favorite books. I thought that was so cool. I think I started reading Sahara in high school, but I actually started with one of the Trojan books. I think it was like Trojan Odyssey was one of the first ones that I picked up. And I remember I was on vacation in Delaware visiting my grandparents, and they took me to the library there, and they allowed me to use their library card to like check out one book while we were visiting. And that was actually the same trip where they took me to a bookstore and I got my very first copy of The Fires of Heaven, which I no longer have. But I digress again. And I picked up Trojan Odyssey by Clive CUSSLER, and I absolutely loved that book. And all of those were kind of standalone-ish, you know. They were all DIRK PITT adventures. And then, of course, you get, like, Inca Gold and stuff like that. Like, just really cool adventures. Kind of like a nautical thriller that I just kind of, like, really identified with those books. Also, there was always, like, classic cars being restored, classic airplanes. And it makes absolutely no sense when you think about it, because, like, the amount of credit card debt that DIRK PITT would have had to have, like, a fleet of classic cars like he had. Like, he lived in, like, an airplane, like a derelict airplane hangar that he turned into, like, this massive garage, and it was silly. But I absolutely loved it, the pneumophiles and stuff like that. And then, of course, surprising nobody, when I turned either 17 or 18, I picked up The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. And this is a series I have read many times. Many times. I have read The Dresden Files going on 4 or 5 times. Except for the last 2 books, which are Peace Talks and Battleground. And then, of course, I've read Side Jobs and Briefcases once also. But yeah, I love The Dresden Files. I don't really need to talk a whole lot about The Dresden Files. It's still a booktube darling. This one is also not... I don't think this one's in my top 10 anymore. I've just read so much fantastic fantasy here lately that I think Jim Butcher is still a top 10 author for me. Like, I'll auto-buy Jim Butcher, but I don't know if Dresden actually holds a top 10 spot for me anymore. I really need to kind of go back and reevaluate my top 10 and really think about what my current taste is, because I have a feeling it's shifted, because I'm really starting to lean into that self-pub kind of just vibe. Like, I love self-pub. I love everything about it. And yeah, so I need to go back and reevaluate. But guys, that is my top 10 list of when I was a young boy. Please let me know in the comments down below, what were some of your favorites when you were growing up? I would love I'd love to know. That said, guys, till next time, peace out. Stay magical. Bye. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons.